Imagine a village where people lived in luxury, happiness, and prosperity. Their houses were grand, their tables were always full, and laughter echoed through the streets. They believed their blessings would never end. But one act of disobedience changed everything. A single moment of greed unleashed a divine punishment, so terrifying that it wiped out an entire community. The land that once flourished with life turned into a desolate graveyard of regret. The voices that once sang with joy were replaced by cries of despair. What was their sin? What mistake led to their downfall? And how did they transform into creatures cursed for eternity? This is not just a legend, it is a warning. A tale of deception, arrogance, and ultimate destruction. Stay with me till the end as we uncover the shocking truth of the people of Ella, whose fate serves as a lesson for all who dare to defy the laws of the Almighty. The people of Ella were from the Ummah nation of Hazrat Dawood, peace be upon him. They lived near the ocean, in a village called Aqaba, blessed with wealth, comfort, and an easy life. Their village was surrounded by breathtaking natural beauty. The vast blue ocean stretching as far as the eye could see, its waves bringing an abundance of fish to their shores. Fishing was not just their livelihood but the heart of their economy. The ocean provided them with more than enough to fulfill their needs, ensuring they lived without struggle or hardship. But Allah Almighty decided to test them. A simple command was given: do not fish on Saturdays. This divine order was part of their religious duty, a test of their obedience and patience. The Sabbath, a Saturday, was meant to be a sacred day, a time for worship and rest, free from worldly activities. At first, the command seemed easy to follow. The people Ella continued their daily lives, confident in their ability to obey this simple rule. But then, something strange began to happen on Saturdays. When they were forbidden from fishing, the sea seemed to be filled with fish more than ever before. The fish would swim close to the shore in large numbers, leaping in and out of the water as if tempting the villagers. But as soon as Sunday arrived, the fish would vanish, making it harder to catch them on other days. This was a test from Allah's disobedience, mentioned in the Quran as Surah Al-A'raaf 7-63, and asked them about the town that was by the sea, when they transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath. When their fish came to them openly on the day of their Sabbath, but on the day they had no Sabbath, they did not come to them. Thus we tested them for the rebelliousness they used to show. The people of Ella found themselves struggling against their desires. The sight of the abundant fish on Saturdays became a temptation too great to ignore. At first they resisted, but as days passed, greed began to creep into their hearts. Some of them started to think, what harm could there be in finding a way around this rule? And so, their downfall began. The villagers couldn't ignore what they were witnessing. Every Saturday, the ocean was teeming with fish, swimming close to the shore, almost inviting them. Silver-scaled bodies shimmered under the sun, leaping joyfully out of the water, as if mocking the fishermen who were forbidden from casting their nets. But on other days, the sea seemed strangely empty, making their work harder and their patience weaker. At first they reminded each other that this was a trial from Allah, a test of their obedience and faith. Some of the pious among them warned, this is a test, we must remain steadfast and trust in Allah's wisdom. But not everyone shared the same resolve. As the days passed, frustration grew. Whispers spread through the village like wildfire. Why would Allah forbid fishing on the very day when fish come in abundance? Some questioned. Others began to doubt, thinking, surely we are not meant to suffer like this. Why should we let such an opportunity slip away? This was exactly what Satan and Satan wanted. The devil, ever so cunning, crept into their hearts, planting seeds of deception and greed. He whispered, you are not breaking the command if you find a clever way around it. Isn't it unfair that you should starve when the fish are right before you? Then came an idea, a trick, a loophole to bypass Allah's command without technically breaking it. One of the villagers suggested, what if we don't actually fish on Saturday? What if we dig trenches and build small water channels leading from the sea into large pools? The fish will swim into them on Saturday, and we can simply catch them on Sunday. That way we won't be fishing on the forbidden day, but we'll still get all the fish. It seemed like a perfect plan. A way to obey the rule while still reaping the benefits. Greed clouded their judgment, and instead of fearing Allah, they became proud of their own cleverness. They convinced themselves that this was not disobedience but a smart solution to a difficult problem. Some villagers protested, warning them, this is nothing but a trick to cheat Allah's command. He sees all that we do. But their voices were drowned out by the majority, who had already decided to go through with the plan. And so, the deception began. They dug water channels and built special pools along the shore. When Saturday arrived, just as expected, the fish swam into these artificial traps. The villagers watched in excitement as the pools filled with fish, their greed overpowering any sense of guilt. When Sunday came, they simply collected the trapped fish, feeling pleased with their own intelligence. Little did they know they had sealed their own fate. They had not fooled Allah. Instead, they had walked straight into destruction. The villagers, blinded by greed and arrogance, convinced themselves that they had found the perfect way to outsmart the divine command. If they weren't casting their nets or pulling the fish out of the sea on Saturday, then surely they weren't breaking the rule. Right? And so they put their deceptive plan into action. They started digging small streams and artificial water channels that connected directly to the ocean. These streams acted as traps, luring the fish in when the tide was high. On Saturdays, when the fish came in abundance, they swam freely into these channels, completely unaware of the trick being played on them. As soon as enough fish had entered, the villagers blocked the exits with rocks and barriers, trapping them inside. The fish, now caught in shallow pools, had nowhere to escape. The people of Ella smiled with satisfaction, believing they had found the perfect way to have it both ways, to obey the law while still reaping the benefits. Then on Sundays, they would return with their baskets and nets to collect the trapped fish. They would justify their actions by saying, "We are not fishing on Saturday, we are only gathering on Sunday." It was the perfect loophole, or so they thought. But can anyone truly deceive Allah? What they failed to realize was that Allah sees beyond actions. He sees the intentions behind them. Their trickery was nothing but open disobedience, disguised under the illusion of cleverness. They had broken the spirit of the command, even if they convinced themselves otherwise. Despite their self-deception, deep down, many of them felt an uneasiness in their hearts. The elders, the wise ones, and those who still feared Allah warned them, saying, "This is nothing but a trick against Allah's law. Do you think He does not know what you are doing? Fear Allah before it is too late." But the villagers laughed. They had tasted the sweetness of greed, and there was no turning back. Their hearts became hardened, and their arrogance grew. Week after week, they continued their deception, completely ignoring the warnings. Their wealth increased, their tables overflowed with food, and they believed they had succeeded in cheating the test. Little did they know, their time was running out. They had sealed their fate with their own hands, and divine punishment was about to descend upon them in a way they could never have imagined. As the villagers of Ella continued with their deceptive practices, their once unified community began to fracture. The test that Allah had sent to them revealed the true nature of their hearts. The village split into 3 distinct groups, each responding to the divine command in their own way. This group consisted of those who remained steadfast in their obedience to Allah. They completely obeyed Allah's command, refusing to fish on Saturdays no matter how tempting the sea appeared. They understood that obedience to Allah was not based on convenience or personal gain, but on unwavering faith in His wisdom and authority. They tried to remind their fellow villagers of the importance of following Allah's laws. "This is a test from Allah," they would say, "and He is the best of planners. We must trust in His wisdom and not fall into the trap of worldly desires." But their efforts were not always met with gratitude. Many of the transgressors ridiculed them, calling them overly pious or naive. They warned others of the consequences of defying Allah's command, urging them to reconsider their actions. But despite their warnings, the righteous ones faced ridicule and mockery. They continued to hold firm, knowing that they were doing what was right in the sight of Allah. The second group, the silent observers, was made up of people who disapproved of the wrongdoing but chose to remain passive. These villagers knew that what was happening was wrong. They saw the traps, the deceit, and the arrogance of their fellow villagers, but they did not intervene. Perhaps they feared confrontation or felt that it wasn't their place to speak out. Let them do as they please. Some of them thought, if they're determined to disobey, there's nothing we can do about it. That these silent observers rationalized their inaction, believing that the wrongdoers would eventually face the consequences of their disobedience, while they, by remaining silent, would avoid trouble. But in doing so failed to realize that silence in the face of wrongdoing can be just as harmful as participation. They did not challenge the transgressors nor support the righteous ones. They stood idly by, indifferent to the fate of their community. Then there were the transgressors, the ones who had completely fallen into the trap of deception. These were the people who embraced the devil's whispers and justified their actions. To them, the plan of trapping fish on Saturdays and collecting them on Sundays seemed like a smart and harmless way to bypass the law. "We're not technically fishing on Saturday," they would say. "We're just preparing for Sunday. It's not like we're disobeying Allah's command directly." They continued their deceitful practices with a sense of pride and enjoyment. The sight of the fish trapped in their artificial pools filled them with a sense of accomplishment, believing that they had outwitted Allah's law. They laughed at the warnings of the righteous ones, dismissing them as foolish. The more they indulged in their greed, the more they grew arrogant, blinded by their own success and trickery. The warnings of the righteous were ignored. The silent observers remained indifferent, too afraid or too disinterested to take action. And the sinners, the transgressors, continued their deceit, convinced that they were in control of their fate. But Allah's wisdom is not bound by time or human arrogance. The patience of the righteous and the indifference of the silent ones did not go unnoticed. And the transgressors, blinded by their pride, were moving closer to a fate they could never have anticipated. The punishment that was about to befall them was not just the consequence of their actions. It was the result of their collective failure as a community. The righteous had tried to stop the evil, but their voices were drowned out by the laughter and the deceit of those who chose to follow their desires. The silent ones, too, were complicit in their own way, choosing to look the other way while others destroyed themselves. As the days went by, it became clear that no one could escape the consequences of their choices. It was only a matter of time before the wrath of Allah would descend upon them all. Days passed, and then weeks. The village of Allah seemed to carry on as usual, but underneath the surface, there was a growing tension. The righteous ones could no longer bear the sight of the transgressors continuing their deceitful practices, laughing at the warnings, and defying Allah's command. Every passing day, the wickedness of the sinners weighed heavily on their hearts. They had tried reasoning, they had pleaded, and yet the transgressors remained undeterred. The silent observers had stayed silent, indifferent to the suffering of their community. At last, the righteous ones reached their breaking point. Unable to tolerate the disobedience any longer, they took a drastic step. They built a massive wall, a physical barrier separating themselves from the sinners. They hoped that by physically distancing themselves from the transgressors, they could avoid being complicit in their disobedience. They believed that this was the only way to protect their faith and their purity. That night, as the villagers slept, something eerie filled the air. A chill swept through the village, and an unsettling quiet fell over everything. It was as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The silence was unnerving, for it was not the peaceful stillness of a calm night. It was the silence before the storm, a prelude to something far darker. And then, as dawn broke, a curse descended upon the village. The next morning, the sun rose as it always did, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the land itself had become hollow. The righteous ones, who had built the wall, were the first to approach it. Their hearts were heavy with a sense of dread, for they knew that something was not right. The sun's rays cast long shadows across the wall, but there was no sound, no movement. The village that was once full of life seemed to have fallen into a deep silence. As they approached the wall, their hearts pounded in their chests. They called out to the others, but there was no answer. No sound came from the other side. No one had come out. Not a single person from the side of the transgressors stirred. The righteous ones anxiously peered over the wall, expecting to see their fellow villagers going about their daily routines. But there was nothing, no movement. It was as though the village had been abandoned in the blink of an eye. The stillness grew suffocating. A sinking feeling washed over them. What was happening? They began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. There were no voices calling out, no footsteps approaching. It was as though the entire side of the village where the transgressors had lived had been swallowed up by the earth. They climbed the wall, desperate to see what lay beyond. But what they saw made their blood run cold. There was nothing. The homes of the transgressors stood empty. Not a single soul remained. The once thriving community had disappeared, as though the earth itself had claimed them. In their place, strange, grotesque forms stood. They were no longer the people they had once been. They were creatures, twisted, distorted, and cursed beyond recognition. Their eyes were wide with terror and confusion, but there was no escape. The transgressors had been transformed into monstrous beings as a consequence of their defiance and deceit. The very earth had rejected them, and Allah's curse had taken its full toll. The righteous ones stood frozen in horror, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The curse that had been promised had now come to pass. They had seen the signs, heard the warnings, but now it was too late. The transgressors, those who had deliberately disobeyed Allah's command, who had allowed their greed and deception to guide them, had been turned into creatures that would never know peace again. Their bodies were deformed, their once human features now twisted into grotesque shapes. Their cries were no longer the voices of human beings, they were desperate howls, lost in a nightmarish abyss from which there was no return. These cursed beings are left to wander, isolated from the world of humanity, forever marked by their sin and their defiance. There was no redemption, no escape. The curse was complete. The righteous ones stood in disbelief, staring at the consequences of disobedience. What had once been a thriving village of prosperity and happiness had been reduced to desolation and terror. The signs had been clear. The warning was there for all to see. And yet, they had ignored it. Now they were left to reflect on the fate of those who chose to deceive Allah and defy His commands. The curse that fell upon the village of Ella was not just a punishment, it was a lesson for all of humanity. Obeying Allah's commands is not optional. It is not something that can be sidestepped or manipulated. The consequences of disobedience, no matter how cleverly disguised, are severe and final. And for the silent observers, those who did nothing to stop the sin, they too were left to reflect on their role in the tragedy. By not acting, they had become complicit in the suffering of their community. Their silence, their indifference, had contributed to the downfall of a once thriving village. The righteous ones, though spared from the curse, could not escape the grief and sorrow that filled their hearts. They knew that their community was forever changed. The people of Ella were no more, and in their place, only echoes of their arrogance and disobedience remained. This was a reminder for every believer. Obedience to Allah is the only way to salvation. And no matter how tempting the world may seem, the consequences of turning away from divine guidance are unimaginably severe. What had happened behind the wall? The righteous group stood before the wall, their hearts heavy with fear and disbelief. Slowly, cautiously, they stepped inside the boundary that had once separated them from the transgressors. As they crossed the threshold, they were gripped by an eerie, suffocating silence. They could sense that something was terribly wrong, but the full extent of what awaited them on the other side was beyond their imagination. What they saw next sent shivers down their spines and made their blood run cold. Every single person who had defied Allah's command, every one of the transgressors, had been transformed into monkeys. The transformation was horrifying. Their bodies were no longer human, they had become grotesque, animalistic versions of themselves. Their faces, however, still carried faint traces of their former selves. The shape of their eyes, the outline of their mouths, the features that were once familiar. But their humanity had been stripped away. The righteous ones looked around in stunned disbelief. They recognized their families, their friends, their neighbors, people they had known for years. But now, these familiar faces were twisted, deformed into the bodies of monkeys, trapped in their own punishment. In desperation, the cursed beings rushed towards their loved ones, their eyes filled with anguish, their hands reaching out in a desperate attempt to communicate. But it was too late. They could no longer speak. The punishment was total and irreversible. Their humanity had been taken from them, and with it, their ability to express any of the emotions or connections they once held dear. They could only cry out in a series of incoherent animal sounds, unable to convey their sorrow. For the cursed ones, there was no hope left. The agony of the transformation was severe. Not only had they lost their human form, but they had also lost their very essence. They lived for just 3 days, unable to eat, unable to drink. As the weight of their punishment slowly crushed them, it was a slow and agonizing end. Finally, they perished, their souls departing from this world in a state of misery, never to be seen again. The righteous ones, witnessing this tragic fate, could only look on in sorrow and fear, realizing the sheer severity of the consequences of defying Allah's law. This horrifying incident was not just a local tragedy, it was a warning for all of humanity, a lesson from the past, preserved for us in the Holy Quran. Allah revealed this story as a reminder of the fate that awaits those who deliberately choose to defy His commandments, especially when they do so out of deception or pride. In Surah Al-Baqarah C265, Allah says, "And, only you surely know those among you who rebelled in the matter of Saturday as Sabbath. So we said to them, the apes despised." Similarly, in Surah Al-A'raaf 163:6, Allah describes the fate of these people in even greater detail. "And asked them about the town that was by the sea, when they transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath. When their fish came to them visibly on their Sabbath day, and on the day they did not keep the Sabbath, they did not come to them. Thus did we give them a taste of humiliation because of what they used to do. Allah's punishment was swift and severe. They had chosen to defy His law for the sake of personal gain, and they were punished not just in this world, but in a way that would last forever. This event serves as a powerful reminder to us all. Those who openly defy divine commands will face consequences far beyond their comprehension. So, what can we learn from this tragic tale of the people of Allah? The people of Allah thought they had found a clever loophole in Allah's command by tricking themselves into believing they were not breaking the rules. But no one can truly deceive Allah. His wisdom and authority are beyond human understanding, and any attempt to bypass His law will lead to destruction. When Hazrat Dawood, peace be upon him, cursed the people for their disobedience, their fate was sealed. The curse that was pronounced by the Prophet of Allah brought an end to their disobedience and marked the beginning of their eternal punishment. When Allah's servants speak with the authority of divine truth, their words are not empty, they carry immense weight. The silent observers, though spared from the curse, were complicit in their silence. By choosing not to speak out against the wrongdoing, they allowed the sin to continue unchecked. Had they intervened, perhaps the outcome could have been different. Inaction in the face of evil is just as harmful as participation. The righteous group, who stood firm in their obedience to Allah, were saved from the curse. Their faith and actions shielded them from the fate that befell the transgressors. Obedience to Allah's commandments brings protection, both in this world and in the hereafter. Brothers and sisters, the story of the people of Allah is not just a tale of the past. It is a reminder for each and every one of us today. How often do we justify our own wrongdoings? How many times do we look for loopholes in the religious commandments, thinking that we can bypass the rules and avoid the consequences? This is a warning that we must not ignore. Let us not be deceived into thinking we can outsmart Allah. His wisdom is supreme and His judgment is final. May Allah guide us to the straight path, protect us from deception, and grant us success in this world and the hereafter. Ameen. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more powerful reminders. Jazakallah khair for watching, and see you in the next video.